Well, I see a red light, so that's different. Are we live? Okay, it looks like we are live again. Sorry for that interruption and thank you for your patience. So for those of you who are looking at this virtually, welcome back. We apologize for the inconvenience of the technology not going down, but hopefully we're good to go for the rest of the evening. So we just left off with going through project objectives, and there was a question that was asked while we were out about one of the bullets to provide direct linkages to the Lincoln Tunnel. We will have a slide to respond to that. It will show precisely what that means in a couple of moments. So we're talking about prior community engagement. This is not a new concept to look at a replacement of the bus terminal, as I had mentioned, and there were previous planning studies that had been completed by the Port Authority years ago that did not meet with a lot of support or interest. And that preceded 2018, going into the later part of 2018, when we re-engaged with the community and elected officials, the city. We have representatives from the city here tonight who's been great working with us on this project. But what this slide is to really show you is once we did what I call the restart of the bus terminal replacement program at the end of 2018 going into 2019 really was when this project really was moving in a much different direction. So in May of 2019, we went public with what we called a planning level scoping document. That was a document based on what we envisioned the project to be. It's not the project that it is today. And we had a year-long process through 2019 with public meetings that were had, public comments, response to public comments, and the project evolved. So in January of 2021, we went public with what that new project was to look like. Initially, we were looking at a project that was just replacing the existing bus terminal and the ramps that are located today at Galvin Plaza. The scope expanded, and I'll take you through what that expansion looked like. So we've moved through from January 2021 to today, where we're now in the formal NEPA process that did begin in June of 2021. And we've gone through a lot of work with the community boards, with the city, with the public, and as you'll hear shortly, more details on the upcoming public hearings. So we're going to go through what the project actually is today. So just in way of orientation, you live here, you know it better than anyone, but what you see outlined in yellow is the entirety of the current bus terminal operations. Going from the right to the left, east to west, is the bus terminal at 8th Avenue and 8th and 9th Avenue, 42nd Street to 40th Street going south. But as you see, it extends all the way over to 11th Avenue, where the current ramps are, Galvin Plaza, and you'll see there are scattered bus parking lots throughout the neighborhood. You live here, you know that. One of the things that's important to note that when we look at now what the scope of the project actually is, the project is being built on Port Authority property only. We made a commitment years ago that the project would not involve taking any private property, and this project will not do that. So what you see here as the footprint will remain the footprint of the new project. And this is what it looks like in the graphic form, but I'll take you through each element of the project in detail so you have that understanding. We'll start with the new main terminal located in the existing bus terminal location. You'll see that in green. That bus terminal, we'll get into some more detail, will also house inner city buses besides commuter buses. What you see in blue is a storage and staging facility. It's a building that does not exist today, but is part of the new project and will exist. And I'll explain what the purpose of that is, how it enhances the operation of the bus terminal, but also enhances the livability on local city streets and the sidewalks. You'll see in red ramps. Ramps aren't a very exciting thing to talk about, but when we get further down, I'll try and make it a little exciting. Won't be able to do a good job with that. What you see here, it says Dyer Avenue deckovers. We know that Dyer Avenue is a depressed roadway, and it makes some people depressed because it is depressed. So one of the things we heard and we listened to was trying to reknit part of the community, where we could, the community back together. So we'll get into a phasing of how we're going to approach this project. So part of that is to deck over Dyer Avenue and ultimately, at the conclusion of the project, convert it to publicly accessible open space. We'll get further into that in just a moment. So these are the project components of what the project is. An element that's critically important for the Port Authority to be able to fund this project as part of our funding strategy and plan is the inclusion of private development. We have air rights that will be located on the north wing and the south wing of the new bus terminal facing 8th Avenue. We'll get into more detail on these buildings as we go through, and we'll talk about timing. So and what I'm going to do is take you through in terms of how things will be coming online, and then we'll look at the timeline put together. So we will commence the project in 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2, which will include the storage and staging facility that will be located on Galvin Plaza. The purpose of this facility would be to consolidate all of the surface level parking lots that's scattered throughout the neighborhood. As you know, the buses circulate around, they get into the bus terminal when they're able to, they cause congestion on the streets because they keep circulating around. They don't necessarily get to their gates on time. They don't necessarily leave on time. And when they do, sometimes it causes a backup. This facility will be linked to the Lincoln Tunnel, to the roadway, the ramps, Dyer Avenue. So back to the idea of the connection to Lincoln Tunnel, through the road system of Dyer Avenue and the ramps, there will be a seamless connection. So a bus coming into the city in the morning, for instance, will come out of the Lincoln Tunnel, stay within the Port Authority roadway system, not having to go on local city streets. You mentioned the intersection of 9th and 40th Street, the opening that's just down the way here where buses come in. That will go away. That will not happen anymore. They will stay within the ramp structure, move through the blue building, the storage and staging facility, and have a direct connection into the bus terminal. The other thing about this structure is, and we'll get more into this in just a moment, this will serve as a temporary bus terminal when we deconstruct the main terminal, this building. But it also, we've heard from some folks on the community board that how it interacts with the community, the sidewalks, is very important. So it will also include street-facing retail. So when you're walking around the facility, that building, it will feel like a regular city street, and not something that's kind of open where you see buses constantly moving around. And it will enhance the overall environment in this location. The ramp structure. Their age, they're not so wonderful. Ramps aren't a pretty thing to look at. I understand that. So hard to make them seem exciting, but there is one thing that is exciting. So today's ramps, they're somewhat narrow. So if a bus breaks down, what it does is it has this kind of domino effect. It backs up into the Lincoln Tunnel, or sometimes in the afternoon, it backs up onto local city streets, depending on how the buses are moving. These new ramps will have a bypass lane, so if a bus breaks down, you're not going to see a backup into the tunnel. You're not going to see a backup on local city streets if they can't get to the ramp structure. Again, back to if a bus is leaving the main terminal, it goes through the storage and staging into the ramp structure and out into New Jersey. It won't have to circulate on the local city streets. And then back to the deckovers. We'll be using that as temporary operations while we're in construction. But again, back to how we'll dispose of that. When I say dispose of that, leave that space at the conclusion of the project. They will be greened into open space. It will be a total of about 3.5 acres of accessible open space. So you can think of it as a combination of Gramercy Park and then the lawn at Bryant Park in terms of the size and kind of the dimensions. Into the main terminal we'll talk now. So the new main terminal will have 5 floors of operations. There'll be 4 of commuter gates, 182 commuter gates, and a floor dedicated to just intercity buses. So that will be 40 gates versus 14. So again, back to what we heard in terms of what the original project was lacking was the inclusion of intercity buses that are operating curbside. This project will enable those buses that are operating curbside to operate within the bus terminal itself. And then again, for those that are coming, say, from westbound locations, not necessarily New England, but coming in, say, from New Jersey, from maybe DC or what have you, they will also be able to access that floor without having to circulate through the local city streets. Of course, we're going to meet the highest standard of ADA accessibility, but what we will also be looking at is a different efficiency of movement for both the users of the bus terminal, the commuters, and the local community in terms of an atrium and the joining of the north and south wing. Again, retail. The main terminal will have interior retail, but also ample amount of street-facing retail. When you go down 40th Street, the side of the building isn't so attractive. So it's true. It's true, but what you'll no longer have is that big gaping entrance where buses go in. It will be kind of creating a much wider sidewalk where there will be I can't even say enhanced, there will be retail that faces outward. So when you walk down that street, you feel like, oh, okay, I can walk down the street and it feels like something versus this space, this wall. Okay, so development I touched on briefly. So while it's not a part of the purpose and need of the project, it's critically important to our funding strategy in order for us to pay for this. So what we are proposing, and these are as of right developments, we're working with the city in terms of what that looks like. Our document, when you read it, talks about maximum potential. So these will be market-driven commercial development at some point down in the future. And I'll take you through Tower 1, which would have a maximum height of 1,300 feet. I know, very tall. Tower 2, a maximum height of 900 feet. Again, that is what we are looking at in terms of what is legally allowed within the zoning context, and these will be subject to market demand. We can touch on that in just a bit further. So current future conditions. So I touched on no taking of private property, and one thing that I did not mention here, but I will here, is we're talking about a $10 billion project, and we will get a little further into that. But what we're most excited about is it's responsive to the needs of commuters. I mean, it's very important in terms of the economic vitality of the city and responsive to the community. So I remember at the beginning of our kind of restart working with the community, to me, it was always important because, I live in a community, we all live in different communities. And and I actually lived on 40th and 9th for quite a while, and understanding, an agency just can't come and tell you this is what you must have. So we really appreciated the work that and the time that the Community Board 4 representatives put into this to help us create a project that really became responsive to not just commuters, but to the host of the facility itself. So here we are today looking at 8th Avenue and the 41st Street environment. What you see on the right is the north wing, on the south wing to the left. And then through where you see that cab is 41st Street. It creates some problems in terms of how this facility works today. It is disjointed. It's hard to navigate below grade if you're trying to if you're a commuter and you're coming in and you're trying to get to a subway, if you live here and you want to get to a subway, it's not the most pleasant environment. So we work very closely with the Department of City Planning and the community board representatives to come up with an ingenious solution to how we can really enhance this overall environment. And what we are looking at doing here is to take that piece of 41st Street, join the two buildings together, and create a central atrium where it is open to the public, of course. It will be light infused throughout the facility, and it creates a much more hospitable kind of environment, both at street level and within the structure itself. It also enables us to do some things that we're unable to do today if we haven't looked at this. For instance, when we originally were looking at placing Tower 2, it was at 9th Avenue. Right here, it would have been right above where we're standing today. Tall building, and the response was move it to 8th Avenue. This enables us to be able to put a core on the east side of the building where a taller building is more suited to a higher district. So what this will also enable us to do is create a much more intuitive way for wayfinding to mass transit, whether you are a commuter or you live here or you're visiting here, you're coming in for a meeting or what have you. This will create an environment that is more like a hub than just a simple bus terminal. This location is in between the north and south wing underneath 41st Street. This is how you get to the subway. Not so wonderful. So by joining the two wings and creating the central atrium, we're able to do this. And what this shows in the purple there is where you'd be coming in at 41st Street from the subway. So go up one level and you're at street level. So it links the two buildings and it creates a space within the facility. So again, if you're a resident, you have a building that you can enter, not be afraid of or embarrassed of, and be able to move throughout it, whether it's the shops or it's to connect to transit in a way that actually makes sense and you feel good about. Oops, here we go. So project deliverables. Elevated public realm was something that we heard quite a bit about, that we needed to make this building a space that was appropriate for the neighborhood, that people felt good about and would not be embarrassed to say, oh, I live near the bus terminal. I remember when I first started this at the Port Authority many, many years ago, and I said, oh, I'm going to work for the Port Authority. I'm like, you're going to work at the bus terminal? That's what everyone thinks. Well, we're changing that. So modern, world-class 21st century facility that will be able to include new technologies, emerging technologies, electric bus fleets, charging stations, if within the storage and staging facility, wider sidewalks, community-friendly street-facing retail, enhancing what we're going to do with street trees, for instance. And we need to have some street trees because there's someone here, if we didn't, I'd hear from quite a bit. So that's for you. So enhanced user experience. We talk about a user experience, and most people think of that as the commuter. It is the commuter, but it's also the people who live here. It's the visitor who has to go, who flies in to one of Hershey's revived airports and is in Midtown and has to get to a point. There's more than one user of this building, and it's not just the commuters. So this enhanced user experience is really so that as we go through this and deliver a project, people who are living in the neighborhood says, okay, now I can, look at that and not feel so bad about what we've done. Improved vehicular and pedestrian flow. Again, we've touched on the scattered lots throughout the neighborhood, how the buses circulate around the streets. This, is just repetitive in terms of the storage and staging, but reducing congestion in the vehicle miles driven by the buses on local city streets, keeping that within a zone that's off local city streets. And that leads to the final deliverable in terms of green energy transition. We are incredibly interested and working very hard towards a zero emissions goal. What LEED rating we're looking for, a V4 silver certification. And we have, a planning department and a sustainability department is working with us in terms of how we even work with the carriers about what their fleets are going to look like in the future to address the natural environment, not just the built environment. Okay, so construction phasing, very important. As you see this calendar here, we are we're in 2024. It's hard to even believe we got that far already. We are closing in on the last portion of our NEPA process. We'll talk about NEPA in just a moment and how you'll be able to get more involved. Once that is complete and the ULURP is also complete, we are doing a ULURP on this project. We are looking at breaking ground end of 2024, really commencing heavy work in 2025 with phase one that we are anticipating would be between 25 and 28. And again, the storage and staging building at that point would then operate as a temporary bus terminal, because that's when we would shift to phase two, beginning in 28 through 32, of deconstructing this building and coming up with a brand new bus terminal. So we're looking at approximately 8 years from today, give or take. So that went through it all. I should have clicked this. Look at that. That would have helped me. So main terminal, and then permanent facility opens. Okay, so this is again repetitious a little bit. The phases. We will start with the deck overs. That will enable us then to be able to approach the rest of the project in a thoughtful way. Building the storage and staging facility and the ramp structure, will be taking the ramps down simultaneous to building the new ramps. Once that is done, easy, back to the main terminal. In terms of the development, when we build the new main terminal, and we're calling it the main terminal, it is the terminal. We will be building that with the cores that will support future commercial development, so that at the time when the market bears the development, someone will be able to come in and plop a tower on top. Simple. And as you see them ghosted in. So the full realization of this does require a full funding plan, and part of that is through the Port Authority making an initial investment within our current capital plan and another investment in our next capital plan. We are currently working with the federal government on a TIFIA loan, and as Hirsch can provide more information, that's moving along nicely. And then we are working with the city relative to the development pieces and a discussion with the city on a payment in lieu of taxes, the pilot. So following a Moynihan model. And then, of course, as we go through this, we'll continue our engagement with USDOT, the FTA, and the City of New York in terms of the totality of the funding. So timeline and next steps. This is kind of a repeat of what we saw in terms of public engagement. We're at number 5. Following the publication of our draft environmental impact statement just the other day on February 2nd. What that means is a public comment period is now in process. It's a 45-day public comment period. And then once that concludes, we'll be in what's called FEIS. We are anticipating our final EIS, the FEIS and Record of Decision, in the summer, August thereabouts of this year. And that would conclude the environmental process. But what we should say is, in terms of the ability to make comments, that goes on the record, which is very important for us to have that. We are having, as Ophelia outlined earlier, a number of sessions, one in person, that is on February 20th in this location here from 8:30 to 10:30. You have to register for that. And then there are 3 virtual sessions. You have to register for those too. And I think our technology will be much better for those. Anyhow, you'll see here on February 21st, there's 2 sessions, 2 to 4, 6 to 8, and then on the 22nd, 6 to 8 p.m., all on the Zoom platform. And as you see on the right, the various ways of being able to provide comments. If you're not able to attend a session, you can go on our website, you can email us. There's a voice message you can leave on the phone. That's interesting. We'll see what that says. And then there's 2 ways you can actually handwrite a letter or and mail it in the old-fashioned way. So ample ways of being able to participate and provide comments, whichever works best for you. And we do encourage participation in this. And that's it. That's our overview. So with that, Hirsch, what is...
Why don't we take some questions
right?
and answer what we can answer
Yep.
tonight?
Okay.
What we can't answer, we'll sort of on to the public hearings.
Okay, very good.
So why don't we start with in the room, and then we'll go to our virtual audience as well.
Hi.
Just have the microphone so the virtual folks can hear this one.
Yeah, two questions initially. I haven't looked at the DEIS. Is there more detail about the design in that document? Okay, so we can look at that. My other question is a process question. You mentioned
Sorry, when you say design, elaborate on what you mean by design.
like floor plans, in a more detailed diagrams about usage in various parts of the project, things like that.
The other thing I think is yes and no, right? Because there are certain elements of design that are still, it's still early in the process. But in
Right.
terms of floor plans and things like that,
Yeah.
bus operations and things like that are in the document. But more sort of aesthetic design and things like that, that's sort of, it's a little early for that.
It was interesting to me that you were noting that there would be a record of decision in August, I think, of this year.
Yes.
So that would precede the final design then?
So this document is a draft.
Uh-huh.
So again, 45-day comment period. We will receive all of the comments. We'll see what the themes are and respond to comments. It may
Okay.
be something that we call through that is enlightening to us, that we would look at maybe making a modification, for instance. By the time we have the FEIS, we'll be at a certain point of engineering that the floor plates, the details can be advanced at that point, yes.
Okay.
And that's by law. We have to do it that way.
Yeah,
following
no,
the
I
federal
understand.
law.
It's always a little bit awkward though, because the process kind of gets ahead of the final design in certain ways. So my second question about process, you mentioned ULURP. What elements of this are subject to ULURP review? If you could just outline that briefly.
I can kind of high level go over that. We are working very closely with the Department of City Planning. They've been, again, very good to work with.
Mhm.
So today there's ramps. When you walk outside, there's ramps that come across 9th Avenue. Those will go away. There will be new ramps. So anything that extends over city streets and sidewalks outside the the Port Authority boundaries in terms of the footprint would fall within that, for instance.
Mm-hmm. But you mentioned the overall bulk, for instance, of the development towers would fit within current zoning. Did I understand that correctly?
You did understand that
Okay.
correctly, and we're
Okay.
working with the Department of City Planning again and their land use folks on the specifics of how that will
Yeah.
work.
There's also there are certain elements of the project that will not be part of ULURP, right? So
Yeah.
we're going to distinguish that.
Right.
That some elements of the project may advance before a ULURP is completed, but that's because they are not part of the ULURP
Right.
application, right? And there will be a public process as part of the ULURP because that's part of the requirements as well, right? That will sort of come later this year.
Great. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Hi.
Hi, and thank you. Do you anticipate that to achieve this in an 8-year optimistic plan, you'll be working 24/7?
No.
Because I live across the street on 40th and 9th,
Right.
and I'm confident it's going to be very disruptive for quite a while.
Well, no, I do not anticipate, and I do not expect us to be working 24/7. That's not reasonable. We didn't even do that at the World Trade Center, and that was a project where we were given a lot of carte blanche to say, okay, fix what occurred in Lower Manhattan. So I would not be comfortable with that. But what we will end up doing is when we start going through the procurement, looking at what makes sense. We will be working with the local community board and the elected officials. We certainly know, I know, because I've done a few projects around, that you have to balance what we're trying to achieve, a schedule, a cost, and the ability to live in the neighborhood. For instance, on 40th Street, there's hotels. They're in the business of selling space for people to sleep. So we have to be cognizant of how we approach the work in a way that makes sense for everybody. I certainly do not want to paint a picture that it's going to be an easy project. It's not going to be an easy project. But what we do commit to, and we have stated publicly, we're not going anywhere in terms of how we're going to go about communicating, planning, and working on the logistics of that project.
Okay.
And I think the other item to, we've learned a lot in terms of construction management over the course of the capital projects we've been doing for the past 10, 15, 20 years. So we've looked at ways to handle, traffic, right? Looked at ways to look at how to minimize some of the impacts on residents and businesses, right? But I think to Glenn's, and we also have to make sure that the bus terminal itself remains operational, right?
Right.
Because that's an important factor as well. So all of these different factors, the community, the commuters, the businesses, traffic, these are all things that we need to be mindful of. But as Glenn said, like, this will be a disruptive project. We don't want to minimize, this is billions of dollars of construction that will be happening, in a very dense urban environment. We recognize that. And we will work with the community, with our stakeholders, with the elected officials, to make sure we are communicating, to minimize and mitigate where possible. But we don't want to sort of downplay that this is going to be sort of a, minimally disruptive project, because it is billions of dollars of construction happening in a very dense environment.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about what the street experience will be in the ramp area as opposed to the building areas?
Very high level, we have to advance the design around that. Is in the ramp area, we are looking at areas where we can also provide street-facing retail. So when you're at the sidewalk and circulating around, it's an environment that's more conducive to other city streets. That it's not just a ramp structure. As Hirsch mentioned, it's early now in terms of architecture and how we're going to handle certain treatments. We're looking at whether it's possible to even screen portions of the ramps, depending on where you're at and whether or not that actually makes sense and achieves something. So it is important for us to be able to think about that location and how those ramps and the interaction of pedestrians, say moving from 11th Avenue to 10th to 9th, have what experience that is. And not only at the sidewalk kind of moving east and west, but when you're moving underneath the ramps. So if you're walking north, south, whether it's 9th Avenue here or 10th Avenue. So all of that is what's being factored into how we're going to deal with the finishes and the facades.
And are you considering other energy sources like geothermal or solar or anything to reduce fossil fuels?
Everything's on the table for us to look at that makes sense.
And then if you don't mind, I'll just.
We have a sustainability roadmap, right? We put forward a plan to achieve net zero by 2050. And so all of our facilities, those are all things that we take very seriously. We're going to look at ways to minimize not just our own emissions, but those, people that use our facility, right? So again, working with the bus carriers, making sure that when they are transitioning their fleet, that they are able to charge inside the bus terminal, right? So we take environmental sustainability very seriously, and we will look at many ways to reduce the environmental impact and the emissions that will be generated from the operation of the facility.
And the last question is just, did you consider residential use on 8th Avenue, or was it, Port Authority mission is for commercial use, or?
On 8th Avenue, it's zoned for commercial, and as I may have hinted to, or maybe did not, I'm not sure, we want to do our development that's as of right within the current zoning context.
It's also critical that, as Glenn said, those commercial towers, we're not in the commercial development business, or we're in the transportation business, but the purpose of those towers is to really help drive funding to help build this project. Because, $10 billion is a very large project, and we need to make sure that we have a fully financed project. That's why, we are stretching our contributions across 2 capital plans. We are talking with the federal government about a loan, and we're discussing with the city of New York about the pilots from those commercial towers being contributed to this project. So, residential is not as conducive to pilot financing to help contribute towards the project, but commercial, you can get that pilot payment and put it towards the project. Let's do one
We
more
have one
question in
back
the room,
here.
and then we'll take a quick break and go to our virtual audience first, and then we'll come back to the room.
I have a question that's also related to the private development. So you mentioned that the private development moving forward will be a really critical funding mechanism for the project. I'm curious, given the state of the commercial real estate market and also, what we've seen unfold at Penn Station with Vornado kind of having to, decouple from the project, how confident is the Port Authority that, this is development that can be relied on, this is money that can be relied on to finance this project?
Yeah, sure. So, I think the short answer to that question is anyone that has bet against New York City has always been on the wrong side, if you look back historically. But there's also data that is showing that the commercial market is on the rebound, right? Just the other, I think a week or two ago, there was a building that I think Gucci bought or sold, one of those things, and it sold for 3 times the amount that the experts predicted it would. I was watching New York One over the weekend. They were having a conversation with some real estate folks, and if you look at the commercial recovery here in the city, it grew almost 40% last year, demand for commercial, and we are at about 75% demand compared to pre-COVID levels, whereas the national average is about 55%, right? And so we're talking about these towers being built in the 2030s, so there's a long sort of timeline from now to then, and we do believe that there will be demand for commercial, especially commercial on 8th Avenue, facing Times Square. And so we are, hopeful that the market will demand these commercial developments, and they will be, they will get built. And that is sort of how we're planning.
Just a very quick follow-up question. I'm just I know this is very preliminary, but I'm just curious if there's been any conversations with, early conversations with developers who might be interested in, pursuing that partnership with the Port Authority.
I think we know what the maximum square footage of those towers would be based on what is currently allowed based on the zoning. In terms of developer interest, I think we did some preliminary just information gathering of would developers be interested, would the size of these be of interest to them. So there was some very preliminary information gathering that helped develop the concept for these towers, but nothing in the realm of potential commercial developers that want to bid on it or things like that. It's just too premature to do that. So why don't we go to our virtual audience? Any questions? No questions. Okay.
From the perspective of the local residents, the kind of the entrance, the south entrance of the, not the south entrance, the entrance that faces 9th Avenue, there's a viaduct and it's very dark and it's very forbidding. And for years, people, transit through there, walking through that 9th Avenue street. I just wonder, the building on the other side is the Project Find building, or formerly Project Find, which is also Port Authority property. How would you incorporate that into, a more pedestrian-friendly area or part of the design? How would that work?
From the standpoint of design, one of the things with this corridor here, we understand a couple of things. One, there is a historic district, Patty's Market Historic District, and as we advance design in terms of how the buildings will look, how they'll interact with the outside world on the outside of the building, this location right behind us here, which is what you're talking about, has some darkness in terms of the ramps that come across. So we understand that, and we see what it looks like. We are looking at a plan on the east side and the west side of 9th Avenue in terms of being able to bring facades in that are within scale of the existing buildings. You have some very beautiful buildings with, turn of the previous century architecture, from the 1900s, the cornices and whatnot, and looking at being able to bring in facades that are actual functioning retail spaces on the east and the west side. That makes sense, that enliven the area, that bring light into the area, and also dealing with the building that comes across 9th Avenue in a way so that there is light within that, daytime and nighttime. So it's a very vague answer, I understand, but we know that there's a challenge there and that we have to change that environment. And we were planning on doing that with some retail inclusion.
You mentioned a lot of retail at the ground floor. Is there also thoughts of community facilities as well?
So we haven't put in place a retail plan, but we have been asked about community facilities. So while I can't speak to that specifically, as I'm really not the one who's going to be working on the retail plan, and I don't know much about retail in terms of what works and what doesn't work. Is there anything you know?
I would just say, I think we use the term retail generically right now
Yeah.
because it could mean a whole lot of different uses. So the short answer is to be determined. We have received that request. We received requests for other programming and uses of the retail spaces as well. I think it's sort of a little early to decide which, what will be where and how will they be programmed and used. But when we use the term retail, it's more of a generic term than, just traditional retail. So.
Just two things. One is your notes about the hearings, although it says 2 to 4 or something like that, those hearings will continue until all the speakers are accommodated, correct?
Yes.
Right. So therefore people can show up virtually or in person and it will be recognized even if it takes more hours than that.
That's correct.
And I'm expecting that from the community board that we would request community facilities to be included. And as part of the ULURP process, determine what kind of retail versus community facility versus some other kind of whatever is needed, and the planning for these parks too in the same time. The ULURP is where the specifics are going to come out in this process. Correct?
Yes and no.
I guarantee it'll be mostly yes. Just saying. Because the ULURP is where the public and the community board has the ability to get agreements to do X, Y, Z, A, B, and C.
Correct.
And we will work through this step by step to the greatest degree we can, right?
Yes, we will work through it.
Back here.
Hey, thanks for this. Can you share anything at this time about impacting or improving air quality during the construction phase? And then you've talked a lot about being Silver LEED certified and some of the efforts afterwards, but what about the path to get there, especially as fleets are not converting to electric at this time?
So I think the question around air quality impacts during the construction phase, there's probably several chapters in the DEIS that address that issue specifically. So I encourage you to maybe take a look at those chapters and also come to the public hearings and sort of make that comment as well. When it comes to the fleets and the actual buses that use the bus terminal, I mean, look, I think there is general consensus that we need to sort of transition away from gas and diesel. Different agencies, different transportation agencies have different timelines. We're not in a position to mandate that, you must, transition to electric in order to use this facility, because ultimately this is a commuter facility as well. But we want to make sure that when that happens, we can accommodate that without issue.
Awesome, thanks.
The question I'm hearing the most around Hell's Kitchen at the moment is there going to be a dog run in the park?
So I think we communicated to the to Astros, right, that during the construction that dog run will need to close. What happens after construction is finished and whether there might be a dog run or not, I don't know at this time.
We haven't
I
even,
would note there will be a community request to keep the dog run continuous operation at some location in the community during construction and afterward. That is a guaranteed community request.
We have a question virtually.
Yes, an online user would like to know, they asked the question, I'm extremely concerned about overnight construction and jackhammering. What is the noise mitigation plan so neighborhood residents will be able to sleep during this project?
so overnight construction, we are not at that point where we know precisely what the schedules are going to be, what the duration of the schedules will even look like at this point. As I mentioned earlier, we're cognizant of the fact that this is going to be a disruptive project and that we will need to work in terms of the schedule, what type of activity is happening when, what are the hours of those various shifts that would occur, and what is mitigation measures that can be employed. So for instance, it's not necessarily the case that you have to do jackhammering at night. You can limit the type of activities for the various shifts. So there is no specific plan at this point in terms of construction methods, sequences, or mitigation measures early in the process for that, but something that we absolutely understand will need to be worked into contracts before those are awarded.
And we will make sure, I mean, part of this is gonna be a communication process, right? Even if it's not noisy construction, it's gonna be making sure that we're communicating what is happening, right? What type of work is happening, when it's happening, where it's happening. We wanna make sure that we are communicating, over-communicating, if that's even possible, right? But just ensuring that the community, the residents, the businesses, even the traffic, that everyone that is sort of a stakeholder in this environment understands what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, etc.
Do we have any other virtual questions? Are we good? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so now I wanted to get into a little bit more of the planning and public realm questions. There's a lot of emphasis in the design, as it's shown here, on the main terminal building between 8th and 9th, but not a lot shown between 9th and 11th. And we've alluded to this a little bit about the storage facility and the ramps. Appreciate the comment about outfacing retail, which I think you said would be on the storage facility.
Yes.
And the decked over park, which is great. What I noticed is that in the previous iteration of the plan, there was 2 residential towers on 10th, which seem to have disappeared. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that from a planning point of view. And I'll just note a few things. There is a residential corridor that's developing on 10th, going up from the south at least to 38th Street, and then picking up on 41st Street. So it seems to me there's a natural residential corridor to go through there. Residential also activates the street. If there's more people there, it creates more of a community. Right now I'm missing that a lot, and it would even activate the park area. So if you could talk a little bit about the process of how that sort of dropped out of the plan, or is it still a possibility, or what the thought is behind that?
Good questions. That also means you've been paying attention. So you're right. The earlier iteration didn't include 4 towers. Tower 1, Tower 2, as I mentioned, at 9th Avenue. What was proposed to be a residential tower in this location, and then facing 11th Avenue was actually a commercial mixed-use building for commercial. So part of the evolution of the project, when we were massing the project and having to fit everything in on our property, again, going back to very important commitment that we made, is that this project will be built on Port Authority property, which meant that our envelope in which we could plan, design, and mass the project was limited. We're not taking any from it. So there's no expansion of space to be able to fit all of the different elements and the operations and whatnot that needs to be included in this project. So we were looking at cantilevers that would extend over city sidewalks in this location at the main terminal. And looking at that and going through some of the work sessions that we had with the community board, we received feedback in terms of what that might be like, in terms of walking down the street, having a cantilever ramp, extending outside the building and over the city sidewalk. So there was a modification made so that we'd be able to take those cantilever ramps and push them inbound into the building, make it a more traditional looking building, trying to narrow.
Use the mic screen.
Oh, okay. So looking at how to narrow the overall ramp structure that comes across 10th Avenue, it was much more cumbersome. So in order to be able to make some of these modifications that we were asked to look at, which we're happy to be able to do, the result of that became that the location, which is a very small location, to be able to locate a core for a residential building no longer was viable, because we changed the entire kind of placement of the ramps in this location and had to extend the ramps further west. So that was what caused us to remove the Tower 3 and the Tower 4 from this project. This location will not allow for a core to be placed. And then again, back to making modifications, there were cantilevers at 40th Street, this wall here, where I'm standing, extending over what becomes the sidewalk, and kind of looking at how to soften the location of 9th and 40th Street and moving the tower over. So there was a lot that went into a design in terms of, if you do this, then that happens, that yin and yang kind of approach. So it became a question of, do we have the cantilevers extending over the street, or do we modify the ramps as we were asked to look at, which we can do, but it came at, in this specific location, the inability to put a core there.
An online user asked, they stated, you mentioned that one of the commercial buildings would be 1,300 feet in height. Would this not cast a shadow on the neighborhood to the north?
So the document that was just posted that we published, the draft EIS, there is an entire chapter on historic preservation that also includes shadow and light. So there's information in that document. I would, ask the online user, thank you, to go to that chapter and look at that specifically, because we do have in there information that looks at the shadow analysis and how shadow is dealt with, or the ramifications of shadow, or in some cases, opening up light by moving the towers. So yes, that is part of the document, and we would ask that you take a look at that chapter. It's included in there.
My question is about the storage facility. Currently, when buses go around, it's open air. Will it be a closed building, and will there be pollution mitigation within the building, or how is that going to work?
It's not 100% designed at this point. One of the things we need to do from a ventilation standpoint, from an air standpoint, we need to maintain at least a 50% kind of airflow that comes in and out of the building naturally. So we will be looking at what the treatment of that building will look like. As Hirsch mentioned earlier, it's a little early right now in terms of facades, treatments of the ramps and the various components, including the storage and staging. But we do want to look at that and how that can be treated.
Because of the angle of this scheme, it's not clear whether that storage and staging facility, and similarly the ramp structure, straddle 40th Street at all, or stop on the south side of 40th Street. Obvious, stop on the north side. No, the south side. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can see that at Dyer-ish, it connects to the main terminal, and that will float above 40th Street. But what's the deal there?
Take that out. So storage and staging, are you looking at ramps here or this location here?
So I'm looking at 40th Street,
Okay, 40th Street here.
and it appears to go under, but that could just be the height of the building and the angle of the diagram.
Okay,
It's not.
so right here in this location at 40th Street, this extends over 40th Street. The building will be between, here's 40th, 39th, so it will be between 39th and 40th Street only at our property line. And in this location here, this is a connector from
Okay.
this building to the terminal over 40th Street.
Thank you.
What height is the connector? Bottom of the connector.
At the bottom, I don't remember precisely. It's in the document, so it is there. Yeah, it's over 60 feet, yes. So today there's a ramp that extends over 40th Street. That's a kind of low ramp. We are, I think it might be even like 65 feet, somewhere in that range, but it's much higher. And again, back to the question, say, that we were just asked about 9th Avenue, looking at how the treatment will be handled there as well in terms of light and view corridors.
Thank you.
Questions?
So I just a clarification, and I haven't read the whole thing either, but related to the question before, so this storage facility, I believe, and the extension of the main terminal behind, so the yellow and the blue part right here, if I'm correct, are the only parts of this project that are literally right, the property itself, which is now open ramps, go right next to private property, right?
That's correct.
So I know I've been a part of this project and conversation as far back as 2018, but I just want on record to hear, is there space between the private property and the Port Authority project? Is there actual space between, or could we expect for the Port Authority project being connected to the private property?
No,
Okay.
not that. However, if you did say you want it on the record,
Yes.
that will be for the public hearings. We cannot put that on the public record here. So, yeah.
Could you describe it? Will be separation?
There will be separation. The extent of that separation, I can't get into the detail right now because I just don't have that available. But the DEIS has a lot of information in there. It's about 16 inches in thickness, so happy reading.
A few of you have said you haven't read the document, and you're saying you haven't read hundreds of pages in the last 4 days? I mean, come on.
If anyone has insomnia, I have a cure for that.
I don't see a link where we can find that.
It's on the PABT website.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so
For those of you that didn't hear, you can go onto the Port Authority Bus Terminal website, which is PABTreplacement.com, and access the document from that website.
right there.
Any other questions? Any other online questions?
Okay, so we look forward to your participation in any of our public hearings, in person or virtual. And we look forward to continuing working with the community board, the city, the elected officials. I'm stepping on your ground.
No, please. Close us out.
So with that, we thank you for your time tonight.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.